My family kicked me out for being a thief. Years later, they have found out who the real thief was. I never thought I'd share this story, but here I am. I need to get this off my chest. I'm 28 now, and for the past 6 years, I haven't spoken to my family. The reason? My younger sister Sarah, who's 24. She was the perfect child in my parents' eyes, and that led to a huge mess that tore our family apart. Growing up in our small town house, it was always me versus Sarah. Not in the usual sister-sister way. This was different. My parents treated her like she was made of gold, while I was just there. When Sarah got good grades, they'd throw a party. When I got good grades, they'd barely notice. I tried everything, sports, music, even helping around the house more. Nothing worked. Sarah was their star, and I was the backup singer who couldn't carry a tune. Sarah knew exactly what she was doing. Being the younger one, she learned early on how to play our parents. If something broke, it was my fault. If she didn't finish her homework, somehow I distracted her. And our parents? They believed every word she said. I remember when Sarah started high school. I was already a junior, and I thought maybe things would get better since we'd be in the same school. Maybe my parents would see how we both handled things. That first semester, I made the honor roll and got accepted into the advanced placement program. My parents said, "Good job," and went back to watching TV. A week later, Sarah got a B+ on a math test, and they took her out to dinner to celebrate her working so hard. That's how it always went. When I joined the debate team and won my first competition, they didn't even come to watch. But when Sarah joined the school choir, they attended every single performance, even the practice sessions. They'd sit in the front row, recording everything on their phones, while I sat at home doing homework. I remember this one summer trip to the mountains when I was 15. I wanted to try rock climbing, the beginner's course, nothing crazy. When I asked, my parents said it was too dangerous. But when Sarah suddenly got interested in it an hour later, they signed her up for private lessons right away. I spent that day sitting on a bench, watching her get all the attention while I pretended to read a book. My best friend Emma was the only one at school who really understood what was going on. She'd been to my house enough times to see how things worked. "Your parents are being unfair," she'd tell me. But what could I do? They were my parents, and Sarah was their golden child. Nothing was going to change that. The favoritism got worse as we got older. In my senior year, when college applications came around, I got accepted into several good schools. My parents said they'd help with tuition if they could, but they weren't sure about money. 6 months later, when Sarah started applying to colleges, they suddenly had enough saved up to cover her entire education at any school she chose. By the time I started college, Sarah and I couldn't even be in the same room without fighting. My parents always told me to be nicer to her, like I was the problem. I started staying away from home as much as possible. Being there just reminded me that I wasn't the daughter they wanted. During my first 2 years of college, I tried to make it work. I'd come home for holidays and birthdays, putting on a smile and trying to play nice. But every visit was the same. Sarah would do something to provoke me. I'd react, and suddenly I was the bad guy again. My parents would lecture me about being more understanding, about how Sarah was sensitive, and I needed to be more careful with her feelings. Nobody ever seemed concerned about my feelings. Everything fell apart during winter break in my 3rd year of college. I was home for the holidays, trying to keep to myself. Sarah claimed her debit card was missing and accused me of taking it. I thought it was just another one of her games until she started searching the house like some TV detective. She found the card in my wallet. I know she planted it there when I wasn't looking. But that wasn't enough for her. She also discovered a new laptop under my bed that she said I bought with her card. I didn't even own a laptop then. It was so obvious she had set me up, but my parents didn't want to hear my side. Sarah put on her usual crying show, saying she'd saved up for months for that card, and that was all it took. My parents called me a thief. They said they were ashamed of me and wanted me out of the house right then. They didn't ask questions or try to understand what happened. They just trusted Sarah, like always. When I tried to defend myself, they threatened to call the police. That night, I packed whatever I could fit in my backpack and left. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. Thankfully, my mom's sister, my aunt, lived nearby. She and her husband were the only ones in the family who ever saw through Sarah's act. They took me in without hesitation. My aunt and uncle weren't rich, but they helped me finish college. They never made me feel like I was a problem, and for the first time, I felt like someone actually cared about me. I worked 2 part-time jobs, one at a coffee shop and another tutoring high school students. Between that and my aunt and uncle's help, I managed to stay in school. I promised myself I'd pay them back once I started working. After graduation, I got a job at a tech company and started building my own life. I cut off all contact with my parents and Sarah. I didn't want updates about them, and I made that clear to everyone I knew. My aunt respected that and never brought them up unless I asked. Some people told me I was being too harsh, that family is family, but they didn't understand what it was like living in that house. For 6 years, I lived my life without them. I made new friends at work, started dating, and even got promoted twice. I had my own apartment in the city, a good group of friends, and most importantly, peace. No more walking on eggshells, no more being compared to Sarah, no more feeling like I wasn't good enough. Then last week, my aunt showed up at my door with a letter from my parents. They couldn't reach me directly since I'd blocked them everywhere, so they'd given it to her. The moment I saw the envelope, my stomach turned. 6 years of silence, and now they wanted to talk? I wasn't sure about reading it, but curiosity won. In the letter, my parents apologized for what happened 6 years ago. They admitted they were wrong to believe Sarah without question. Apparently, she wasn't the perfect daughter they thought she was. After I left, Sarah took a gap year that turned into 3 years of partying and doing nothing. My dad finally hired her at his insurance company, hoping it would help her grow up. Instead, she started stealing money from the business. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. The first 2 times, they forgave her. The third time was too much. Now they're suing her for stealing company funds, and they want me to testify against her in court. They say they've realized I might have been telling the truth all those years ago. Now they need my help. The irony isn't lost on me. After getting that letter, I spent days thinking about what to do. These past 6 years without my family have been surprisingly peaceful. At first, adjusting to life without them was hard, but looking back, cutting them out was the best decision I could have made. My aunt and uncle's support changed everything. They gave me more than just a place to stay. They showed me what real family love looks like. My aunt never questioned my side of the story. She'd seen how Sarah manipulated everyone for years. My uncle, who usually stayed out of family drama, even spoke up about how unfair my parents had been. Living with them taught me a lot. They weren't rich. My uncle worked as a mechanic and my aunt was a school teacher, but they made it work. I watched how they handled their problems together, how they communicated without blame or favoritism. It was so different from what I grew up with. During that time, I focused everything on finishing college. I worked my coffee shop job in the mornings, did my classes during the day, and tutored in the evenings. It was exhausting, but it kept me busy and helped pay some bills. My aunt and uncle covered what they could, even though I told them not to worry about it. Family helps family, my aunt would say. The real kind of help, not the strings-attached kind. My friends from college were great too. Emma visited often, and my new friend Jess from the coffee shop became like a sister to me, the kind of sister I wished I'd had. They helped me realize I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt by my family's actions. Sometimes you need outside perspectives to see that you're not the problem. After graduation, things got better quickly. I landed an entry-level job at a software company. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was enough to rent a small apartment and start paying back my aunt and uncle. They didn't want to take the money, but I insisted. I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own. Work became my focus. I put in extra hours, took on additional projects, and eventually got promoted. My team leader noticed my dedication and became a mentor to me. She taught me about setting boundaries, both at work and in life. You can't pour from an empty cup, she'd say, and she was right. I started dating too, nothing serious at first. It took time to trust people, to believe that they might actually want to be around me for me, not because they wanted something. Then I met Mike at a company event. He was different, patient, understanding, and most importantly, he listened. We've been together for 2 years now, and he knows enough about my family situation to understand why I don't talk about them. Life settled into a good rhythm. I had my job, my friends, my relationship with Mike, and my aunt and uncle nearby. I didn't think about my parents or Sarah much anymore. Sure, sometimes I'd wonder how they were doing, but those thoughts didn't hurt like they used to. Then my aunt showed up with that letter, and suddenly all the old feelings came rushing back. I've read it several times now, and each time I feel something different. At first, I was angry. How dare they ask for my help after what they did? After years of ignoring me, believing Sarah's lies, and throwing me out, they think they can just write a letter and everything will be fixed? But then I felt something else, a twisted sort of satisfaction. Sarah had finally shown her true colors, and my parents had to face it. No more perfect daughter, no more golden child. The mask had fallen off, and they were seeing what I'd seen all along. According to the letter, Sarah's gap year after high school was just the beginning. While I was working 2 jobs to stay in college, she was living at home, sleeping until noon, and partying every night. My parents kept making excuses for her. She's finding herself. She's figuring out her path. She just needs time. 3 years passed like that. Finally, my dad gave her a job at his insurance company, probably hoping some responsibility would straighten her out. Instead, she started taking money from the business. The first time they caught her, she cried and promised to pay it back. They believed her, just like they always did. The second time, they gave her another chance, thinking she'd learned her lesson. The third time was different. She'd gotten bolder, taking larger amounts. when they discovered she'd stolen nearly $50,000. Even they couldn't ignore it anymore. Now they're suing her, trying to recover the money before the company goes under. That's why they need my testimony. They want me to tell the court about Sarah's history of lying, about the debit card incident, about all the times she manipulated them. They think it will help their case, show that this behavior isn't new. They're probably right, it would help. But should I do it? My aunt says she'll support whatever decision I make. Mike thinks I should stay out of it. He's seen how much progress I've made and doesn't want me getting pulled back into their drama. My friend Emma reminded me that I don't owe them anything. But there's this small voice in my head wondering if this could be closure. Maybe testifying would be my chance to finally be heard, to have everyone know I was telling the truth all along. Maybe it would force my parents to really see how much they hurt me by always taking her side. Then again, getting involved might just drag me back into their toxic world. Their letter apologizes for not believing me, but it's clearly only because they need something from me. If Sarah hadn't stolen from them, would they have ever admitted they were wrong? Would they have ever reached out to make things right? I've spent the last week going back and forth on this decision. Every time I think I've made up my mind, I second-guess myself. Part of me wants to help them, if only to prove I'm not the bad person they thought I was. But another part of me knows that getting involved in their problems again could undo all the healing I've done. While I was still trying to figure out what to do, my aunt called me with news. My parents were getting desperate. They'd been calling her daily, asking her to convince me to help them. Without my testimony, they were worried they'd lose the case against Sarah. My aunt, being the amazing person she is, didn't pressure me at all. She just told me what was happening and let me make my own choice. But my parents weren't satisfied with waiting. Last Tuesday, I was coming home from work when I saw their car parked outside my apartment building. After 6 years of no contact, they were sitting there waiting for me. I almost turned around and walked away, but I knew this confrontation had to happen eventually. As I got closer, my mom jumped out of the car and rushed toward me like she was going to hug me. I stepped back. The look on her face, somewhere between hurt and shock, showed she hadn't expected that reaction. My dad got out next, and they both stood there like they were waiting for some kind of happy reunion. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. My mom started crying immediately, her go-to move when things don't go her way. "We just wanted to talk to you in person. We thought maybe you'd listen." My dad tried next, using that stern but pleading voice I remembered from childhood. "We know you don't want to get involved, but we're your parents. We're asking for your help. Don't you care about what's happening to this family?" That's when I realized they hadn't changed at all. Even now, they were trying to guilt me into doing what they wanted. I took a deep breath and stood my ground. "I do care," I said, "but I care about my peace more. You made your choices 6 years ago, and now I'm making mine." My mom wiped her tears and stepped closer. "We were wrong, okay? We're sorry for what we did. But we need you now. We don't know what else to do." "You're only sorry because you need me," I told them. "You've had 6 years to reach out. The only reason you're doing it now is because Sarah messed up. You didn't contact me because you missed me or because you wanted to make things right. You reached out because you want something from me. That's not an apology. That's manipulation." My dad's face hardened. He's always had a temper, and I could see it coming. "You're being selfish," he snapped. "After everything we've done for you, Dash." I cut him off. "Everything you've done for me? You kicked me out of the house and cut me off. You chose Sarah over me without even listening to my side. Don't act like you've been there for me. You haven't." That shut him up. My mom was still crying, but she wasn't saying anything anymore. I decided to end this once and for all. "I'm done," I said. "I want you to leave. I don't want you showing up at my place, calling me, or sending letters. If you keep pushing this, I'll file for a restraining order." They looked at me like I'd slapped them. I think that's when they finally realized I wasn't the same person I was 6 years ago. I wasn't desperate for their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation. They got back in their car and drove away. I stood there for a few minutes, processing what had happened. Then I went inside and called my aunt. She was furious when I told her they'd shown up uninvited. She offered to help me file for a restraining order if they tried anything else. Since then, I haven't heard from them. I don't know if they've finally accepted my decision or if they're planning something else, but I'm prepared either way. I've blocked them on every possible platform, and I'm ready to follow through on my threat if they show up again. The strange thing is, I feel lighter now. For the first time, I truly feel like I'm in control of my life. I don't have to worry about their approval or their expectations. I've made my choice, and I'm standing by it. As for Sarah and the lawsuit, I've heard through my aunt that it's not going well for her. The evidence against her is strong, and without my testimony, my parents don't have much of a case. But that's not my problem anymore. Sarah made her choices, and now she has to face the consequences. I don't feel bad for her, and I don't feel bad for my parents either. Mike and I have been talking about our future. We're planning to move in together next month, a fresh start in a new place. My aunt and uncle are helping us look for apartments, and my friends are excited to help with the move. It feels good to be surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. I've also started seeing a therapist. After everything that happened with my parents showing up, I realized there were still some things I needed to work through. It's been helpful talking to someone who can give me an outside perspective. I'm learning that it's okay to let go of toxic family relationships, that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Through therapy, I've come to accept that I'll probably never have a healthy relationship with my parents, and that's okay. Some families just aren't meant to stay together. Forcing a relationship that's based on manipulation and emotional abuse isn't worth the pain. Most importantly, I've realized that I'm not defined by my past. My childhood, my toxic family dynamics, none of that determines who I am today. I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded myself with people who love me for who I am, not for what I can do for them. The other day, my therapist asked me if I regret my decision to cut ties with my family. I thought about it for a moment, but the answer was clear. No, I don't regret it. Yes, there are times when I wonder what could have been different if my parents hadn't played favorites, if Sarah hadn't been so manipulative. But wondering about what-ifs doesn't change the reality. My reality now includes a loving partner, supportive friends, a good job, and the kind of peace I never had growing up. I don't need my parents' approval anymore. I don't need to prove anything to them, or to Sarah. I'm moving forward with my life, and for the first time in a long time, I'm excited about what comes next.